The dry grass whispered secrets in the evening wind, but only one man was listening. Kneeling in the dust, his own shadow stretching long in the fading light, he was a solitary figure beside a fallen king. The lion was a monument to ruin, his breath a shallow, ragged tremor that barely stirred the flies clustering on his emaciated flanks. His mighty ribs stood out like the struts of a broken ship, and his glorious mane was a tangled mat of dirt and despair. The man, his name was Elias, placed his hand on the earth, his fingers just inches from the lion's massive, powerless paw. He did not flinch as the first chilling whoops of hyenas pierced the twilight, drawing closer, sensing an easy end to a hard life. Elias looked into the lion's half-closed eyes, his own vision blurring with tears. He knew the night would be long, and he knew the odds were vanishingly small. But he made a silent promise, a vow to the fading light in those amber eyes. You will not die alone. This was not a random act of mercy, but the culmination of a tragedy Elias had watched unfold from a distance. The lion, a magnificent male known to the local guides as Jabari, had once been the undisputed ruler of this stretch of savanna. His roar had been the bass note to the symphony of the wild, a sound that commanded respect and fear in equal measure. But power in the animal kingdom is always contested. A brutal, bloody clash with a coalition of younger males had left him dethroned, battered, and alone. A deep, infected gash on his shoulder made hunting impossible. Every pounce was agony, every sprint a failure. Driven by a thirst that burned hotter than his pride, he had strayed perilously close to the village outskirts. The people, fearing for their livestock and their children, had done what humans have done for millennia. They drove the threat away. Stones were thrown, shouts echoed, and Jabari was pushed further into the barren margins, away from the water he so desperately needed. By the time placed carefully, respectfully, just within reach, it was a desperate gamble, a high-stakes game of trust where the price of a mistake was measured in blood. He was betting his life on the last flicker of consciousness in a wild predator. As the sun vanished, plunging the world into an inky blackness, the true test began. The hyenas, emboldened by the darkness, emerged from the shadows. Their eyes glowed like malevolent coals in the beam of Elias's torch. First it was just a pair, then 5, then a whole clan, their laughing calls a sinister soundtrack to the vigil. Elias stood his ground, his body a barrier between Jabari and the circling death. He waved the torch, shouted until his voice was hoarse, and threw rocks into the darkness to keep them at bay. It was a primal standoff. And then, something unbelievable happened. A low, guttural rumble emanated from the lion. With a monumental effort, Jabari lifted his head and unleashed a roar. It wasn't the earth-shaking bellow of his prime. It was a weak, rasping echo of it. But it was enough. It was the voice of kings, and the hyenas, startled, melted back into the night. In that moment, the two of them, man and lion, were allies against the common enemy of the dark. Hours passed in a tense, exhausted silence. Near midnight, a shift occurred. Jabari, who had lain motionless for so long, slowly, painfully, lifted his head. He looked at the bowl of water Elias had just set down. Then he looked at Elias. The fear, the aggression, the wild panic was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, exhausted acknowledgement. He dipped his head and began to drink, the sound loud in the stillness. He drank for a long time. When he was done, he didn't lower his head to the ground. He kept his gaze fixed on the man who had not left him. It was a fragile, unspoken truce. In the face of certain death, trust had been born. Elias felt a surge of emotion so powerful it stole. As if moving through deep water, he lifted his head. He blinked, his eyes clearing. With a grunt of effort that spoke of immense will, he pushed himself up onto his chest, and then, unbelievably, onto his feet. He stood there, swaying slightly, a giant reborn. The entire village, who had gathered at a distance to watch the drama, fell into an awed silence. Elias took an involuntary step back, his heart hammering against his ribs. Jabari turned his great head and locked eyes with the man who had stayed. The gaze lasted a lifetime. And then, the lion did something that left everyone breathless. He dipped his head in a slow, deliberate bow. It was a gesture of profound grace. Then, he turned and, with a steady, determined limp, began to walk away, disappearing into the tall, golden grass of the new day. It wasn't a retreat. It was a dignified departure. It felt, to everyone who saw it, like a thank you. Jabari did not just survive, he reclaimed his kingdom. Weeks later, reports came in from game rangers of a healthy, scarred lion hunting successfully near the river. Elias returned to that spot often, the place where he had knelt in the dust. He would place his hand on the earth, now teeming with life, and feel a profound connection to the wild he had dedicated his life to. The story spread through the village, changing its people. They no longer saw the wilderness as something to be feared and dominated, but as something to be respected and protected. They agreed to create a buffer zone, to share the land and its water. Elias's all-night vigil became a legend, a story told to children about the night a man and a lion faced death together and chose life instead. In the end, the most powerful rescues are not always about dart guns and cages. Sometimes they are about presence. They are about the simple, staggering courage of refusing to abandon another soul to the darkness. Jabari's story is a testament to the miracles, flushing the infections, stitching torn muscle, and administering a steady regimen of antibiotics and nutrients through his IV. Slowly, the haunted look in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a growing awareness and a flicker of his old regal spirit. The lion who had collapsed in the dust was gradually disappearing, and a new animal was emerging in his place. With his physical health improving, a new challenge presented itself: the preservation of his wildness. A lion cannot be turned into a pet. His spirit was meant for the open savanna, not the confines of even the most comfortable enclosure. The rescue team began the critical process of soft release. They stopped hand-feeding him, instead introducing live prey into his large enclosure, first small, easy-to-catch animals. The first time a guinea fowl fluttered in, Jabari merely watched it with bored confusion. The instinct to hunt, dulled by weeks of being provided for, seemed to have vanished. It was a terrifying setback. Could a king forget how to be a king? But nature's programming runs deep. Days later, driven by an ancient impulse he couldn't name, he finally stalked and pounced. The move was clumsy, inefficient, but it was his. That successful kill, the taste of his own earned meal, was the final key to his rehabilitation. He was no longer a patient. He was a predator again, proud and self-sufficient. News of the village lion spread like wildfire across the region, but not as a cautionary tale, as a story of hope. The video of his collapse and the villagers' brave response was shared on a local news station, and then it caught fire online. Donations, small and large, began to trickle, then flood into the small rescue organization that had aided him. The funds provided new veterinary equipment, a better vehicle for emergency responses, and the means to build a larger pre-release facility for other animals in need. School children from the village and beyond drew pictures of Jabari and Elias, and the story was told in tall grass, his tawny coat blending seamlessly with the landscape. The villagers and rescuers who had gathered to watch let out a collective, held breath. There were tears, but they were tears of joy. They had not tamed him. They had returned him. He was home. Months later, a research team conducting a wildlife survey in the reserve captured something extraordinary on their trail camera. The footage showed a magnificent, fully maned lion, healthy and powerful, standing atop a rocky outcrop, surveying his kingdom. As the camera zoomed in, there was no mistaking the distinctive pattern of old scars on his flank. It was Jabari, and lying nearby, resting peacefully in the shade, were two lionesses of his new pride. He had not just survived, he had thrived. He had reclaimed his birthright. This final image, the fallen king restored, is the ultimate reward for the courage of a village. It proves that every life is worth fighting for, and that compassion is the most powerful force we possess to change the story for the creatures we share this planet with. His legacy is not just his survival, but the hope he ignited, a hope that continues to grow long after he disappeared into the grass. But the story of the village and the lion did not end at the reserve's boundary. A new, delicate balance had to be found. The very proximity that had nearly killed Jabari now required thoughtful management. The rescue organization, empowered by the global attention, worked with the villagers to establish simple but effective measures. They helped reinforce livestock enclosures with stronger, predator-proof fencing, eliminating the reason for most conflicts. They installed a new, solar-powered water pump a mile from the village, creating a reliable water source for wildlife that would keep them from desperately seeking out the village well. Elias became an unofficial ambassador, teaching the children to respect the wild animals from a distance, to understand their ways without fear. The village's act of compassion had forged a new identity for them, not as victims of the wild. Truth that a single act of courage can ripple through time, protecting generations. The lion collapsed on the road, but in saving him, the entire village stood a little taller, forever changed by the king they helped return to his throne. The true miracle was not just the healing of the lion's body, but the mending of a fractured relationship between man and beast. For generations, the story had been the same. The wild was a threat, and predators were to be driven away or destroyed. But Jabari's journey rewrote that ancient narrative. He became a living lesson, a symbol that shifted the very perspective of an entire community. Parents who had once taught their children to fear the deep rumble of a lion's roar now spoke of it with a sense of reverence, a respect for a power that they had helped to restore. The village, once defined by its perimeter, now saw itself as part of a larger, breathing ecosystem. They had looked into the eyes of the wild and seen not a monster, but a soul. And in doing so, they found a piece of their own humanity reflected back at them. The legacy of that single night extends far beyond the borders of the village. The story of Elias and Jabari became a case study, a blueprint for other communities living on the edge of wilderness areas around the world. Conservation groups use their story to show that coexistence is not just an idealistic dream, but a practical reality. It proves that the most powerful tool in conservation isn't always a dart gun or a capture cage. Sometimes, it's simply the courage to extend a hand instead of raising a weapon. The funding that poured in from around the globe didn't just help Jabari. It established a permanent wildlife fund for the region, ensuring that the next injured animal would have a fighting chance, and that the people who shared their land with these magnificent creatures would have the support they needed to protect them. As the sun sets on the savanna, casting long shadows across the land, a new generation listens to the story. They hear of the man who knelt in the dust, of the lion who bowed his head, and of the night an entire village